Welcome to the second part of renal function test. In the first part, we have seen into the routine urine examination, both physical examination and the microscopic examination. Now, in this section, we will have the evaluation for the renal function. To summarize various aspects of renal function, we have aspects like glomerular filtration rate, renal plasma flow, reabsorption and excretion of various substances like sodium, potassium, calcium, inorganic phosphate, glucose, urea, amino acids, and water. Thus, we know that these are some certain substances which are reabsorbed or excreted out in the nephron. Usually, in clinical practice, determination of creatinine clearance is a measure of glomerular filtration rate. Water deprivation or loss of water, but if the person is drinking less of water, a vasopressin administration test is done to determine urinary concentrating ability. Also, bicarbonates and ammonium chloride loading test to examine urinary acidification are usually sufficient for diagnostic evaluation and measurement of kidney function. So, we have an indirect criteria like creatinine clearance. Look into the concentration of creatinine or what amount is usually made and what amount is excreted out as a measure for glomerular filtration rate. Also, we will look into the concentration ability of kidney by either administering vasopressin or depriving the person from water. So, we look into the reabsorption capacity of kidney in case of that how much reabsorption of water can be done. The result of these tests are important in assessing the excretory function of kidney. For example, grading of chronic renal insufficiency and dosage of drug that can be excreted primarily via urine are based on GFR, that is glomerular filtration rate, and the creatinine clearance. Let us start with the glomerular function test. Whether your glomerular is functioning right or not. The concept of clearance is based upon the fact that the rate of removal of a substance from the plasma must equal its simultaneous rate of excretion and release. So, clearance means if it's coming out of the plasma and it's getting filtrated, the same amount should be excreted in the urine. If suppose what is happening is in the glomerular, if the filtration is being done, and obviously the creatinine, or in this case we have creatinine as the substrate of concentration. If the creatinine is filtered but not secreted or removed in the urine completely, rather what we see that it's getting reabsorbed, then that stands that there is some imbalance or there is some clearance defect in the urine formation. Thus, if urinary excretion rate and plasma concentration of the substance are known, we can calculate the volume of plasma from which that substance could have been completely removed. So, knowing the urinary concentration of a substance and also knowing the plasma concentration. So, if we know both of these, so we can calculate the clearing clearance efficiency. That is, we have the standard formula. Also, here the substance which is used as a reference substance is inulin. And we have a reason also why inulin is in use. So, the clearance, the formula for standard clearance formula is clearance is equal to U into V divided by P, where C stands for the clearance per minute, U stands for urinary concentration, and V stands for the urine volume, and P stands for the plasma concentration. So if both urinary and plasma concentration are known, we can obviously measure the volume of the urine, we will come to know about the clearance of a substance. If a given substance is freely filtered and neither reabsorbed nor excreted, its clearance rate would accurately reflect glomerular filtration rate. So, if a substance is freely filtered, it's not associated with anything. So that is the reason we used inulin, because its filtration was uh, free and neither reabsorbed nor excreted. Its clearance rate would accurately reflect glomerular filtration rate. Also, glomerular filtration rate can be estimated by measuring serum creatinine level and height. The formula proposed is the height of the person. The height is the height of the person. The formula proposed by Squats is useful for children, like GFR, that is the glomerular filtration rate, is equal to K, which is a constant. It can have a variable uh, value according to the age, height in centimeters divided by serum creatinine level. So if we obviously would know the height, we have this constant, and if we have this value of serum creatinine, so we can calculate the glomerular filtration rate. So K is a constant which would be having a value of around 0.34 in preterm infants, in term infants at 0.45, in children and adolescent girls it's 0.55, and in adolescent males it's 0.7. So this is the squats formula for calculating the GFR. Serum creatinine and creatinine clearance. Creatinine is derived from the metabolism of creatine and phosphocreatine, the bulk of which is in the muscles. So the metabolism of creatine and phosphocreatine will lead into formation of creatinine. Since creatinine is chiefly excreted by the glomerular filtration, so if we know that what is the serum creatinine level, then we can have a rough estimation of the glomerular filtration rate. Serum creatinine values are low when the muscle mass is decreased, as in malnutrition. Bilirubin here will interfere with creatinine measurement, which stands out to be important in cases of neonatal jaundice, where the bilirubin level, serum bilirubin level increases many folds. So that will actually interfere with the measurement or knowing the exact quantity of serum creatinine. Now we have the serum creatinine values for from the cord age to the newborn and till the adult male and female. So the maximum value that we can have is 0.72, 1.3 in adult males, and in adult females it's 0.6 to 1.1. So these are the different values according to the age relevancies. Now we have one more low molecular weight glycosylated protein product, that is cystatin C. It is produced as a constant rate by a nucleated cell in the body, freely filtered by the glomeruli, not secreted but totally reabsorbed by the renal tubule. Little or no cystatin is excreted in urine. Normal adults have circulating level of approximately 1 milligram per liter of blood. This is better indicator of renal function as compared to creatinine in early stage of glomerular filtration rate impairment, as it is independent of age, gender, body composition, and muscle mass. So, what do we understand from this fact? It's that uh, it is it's made by all the nucleated cell. It is freely filtered. It's not dependent on any other factors in the glomeruli, and is not secreted. It is completely reabsorbed by the renal tubules. Secondly, as its value doesn't changes, as we have seen in the case of creatinine, there was a change in the concentration of serum creatinine according to the age and also the gender. But for this particular cystatin C, we don't find any variation according to the age and sex of the individual. So cystatin C can be estimated in blood by enzyme immunoassay or immunoturbidometry. Both techniques are currently kit-based and expensive, so usually we don't go for this cystatin C test in the routine checkup. But you should keep in mind that in case you want an independent evaluation, so serum creatinine is not clearing your doubts, you can go with cystatin C valuation. Other technique for measuring the glomerular filtration rate in clinical practice is the single injection technique, where radionuclides are often used to estimate total glomerular filtration rate or to measure difference in the clearance between one kidney compared to the other in the same patient. And how do we do this? It is based on the use of single injection plasma disappearance curve to estimate the 2 GFR. So what we do is we do induce some uh, nucleotides into the circulation, radionucleotides, and we look into the disappearance curve, that is in how much time and with what speed is this particular substance getting disappeared from the circulating blood. So the radionuclide dye is injected and the signal from radio-labeled form is used to obtain the measurement. Most commonly, we use EDTA and DTPA, that is diethyl triamine penta-acetic acid and ethylene diamine tetraacetic acid and clothamate are used. Inohexol, a non-ionic, non-radioactive, low molecular weight radio contrast agent, as an alternative to inulin may be used, measured easily by high-performance liquid chromatography. So these are some other techniques with which you can estimate the glomerular filtration rate. So here, the point to be remembered is that radionucleotides are usually used, and here we have this benefit of differentiating it from one kidney to other, where as they are radio labeled, we can have scanning and we can also see how either of the kidney is functioning. Next in line after creatinine is the blood urea level. The normal level of blood urea is often mistaken regarded to indicate normal kidney function. So, how does it varies or high value of blood urea? Uh, what does it indicate? In a steady state, the blood urea may not rise beyond the upper range of normal, and even when 75% of renal function is lost, that is, the upper range normal is 40 milligram per deciliter of blood. Even if the kidneys are not functional, that is, 75 of the renal function is lost, still we will not get a high value of blood urea. On the other hand, pre-renal factors that decrease renal perfusion and glomerular filtration, such as dehydration, causes an increase in the blood urea level. So, uh, see, both these points are quite contrasting and very interesting to know that even if your kidney is only 25% functional, still you are getting the normal range of blood urea. On the other hand, what is happening is where the kidney function is totally intact, your kidney is 100% functional, but the pre-renal factors, that is, which were in like dehydration, they have mentioned it. So these will interfere with the amount of blood entering into the filtration. So that will increase the blood urea level. There may be a transient rise in the blood urea level due to how it can be variable. Like today, if I have consumed more of protein products, so I will have a high level of blood urea. So it can have a transient rise, like high protein intake, excessive protein catabolism, as in the cases with severe infection, tissue breakdown, trauma, use of large doses of corticosteroids and tetracycline. Also, certain factors that will interfere or they will temporarily increase the blood urea level. Now, after the blood urea level, we have the renal blood flow. So, what amount of blood is actually entering into the kidneys will also affect the function of kidney. So, what we have is uh, renal blood flow is measured by performing using the clearance of a substance known as PAH, that is para amino epurate. That is more than 90% of para-amino epurate is extracted from the plasma during the first pass through the kidney. Therefore, the renal clearance of PAH, that is para-amino epurate, is commonly used as an estimation of renal plasma flow. So it's quite understandable. Suppose this particular substance is not cleared, that is not less than 90%, or suppose 70% is only cleared from the kidney. So that gives you an estimate that there is a fall in the amount of blood flowing in the kidney. So plasma concentration clearance following single injection of 131 heparin or 99 mtc mercaptoacetyl triglycerine is an alternative method. So these are certain chemicals which are used for this testing. But the one we need to remember is pH, that is para-amino epurate. Renal blood flow is calculated by dividing. The renal blood flow is how to calculate it is by dividing the value that we get from renal plasma flow by 1 minus the hematocrit value. So RPF divided by 1 minus the whatever value of hematocrit we have. Normal value ranges from 500 to 600 ml per minute. Other methods are color Doppler ultrasonography, contrast enhanced ultrasonography, and MRI may also be used to estimate renal blood flow. Now we come to the urinary concentration. So this is also an important function, that is to concentrate the urine according to the needs of the body. Suppose if you have had a lot of water, then the concentration of water urine would be obviously less, and if you are under the process of dehydration, the concentration of urine will increase. So the osmolarity depend upon the number of particles in the solution, not on their size or density. So more the number of molecules, more will be the osmolarity. The maximum urinary concentration capacity varies with the age. Like in neonates, it's around 700 milliosmoles per kg, whereas in older children and adults, it can rise up to 1200 milliosmoles per kg. So this is this condition, that is hyposthenuria. It is inability to increase urine osmolarity more than that of the plasma. So this is a very characteristic feature of diabetes insipidus as well as disease of renal medulla such as obstructive uropathy. So in these cases, what we will find that we will have same concentration or less concentration as compared to that of the plasma. Plasma, the even concentration, equal concentration to plasma or less than plasma. Polydipsia and polyuria are striking features, and as we know, diabetes insipidus is associated with such symptoms. In chronic renal failure, urine osmolarity does not rise much, about 400 milliosmoles per kg, and polyuria and polydipsia are not common. So again, we have this differential. Suppose you are having a urine which is having very low concentration, but still you are not having polyuria and polydipsia, then you can think of chronic renal failure. So osmolarity, how do we calculate the osmolarity? So we have this formula, that is 2 multiplied the concentration of sodium plus glucose, concentration of glucose divided by 18 plus That is blood urea nitrogen divided by 2.8. So this is a formula how to calculate the osmolarity. We also have a test known as urinary concentration test. It is urinary concentration is actually an ability need to be tested in setting of polyuria. So in case you have frequent urging to urinate or the number of times you are going to the urine. So what we see in the first morning void after 12 hours of overnight fasting has osmolarity exceeding 700. No further testing is required in others. And in others, what we can do is water deprivation test might be done. So, see, urinary concentration test, what he has done is, what we have done is 12 hours overnight fasting. And after that fasting, you get the morning sample. And if the concentration is more than 700, so we are sure that it's okay. So the condition is quite fine. Then we can go for water deprivation test. That is, we won't give any water to the person, and then we'll test the osmolarity. If the concentration is more than 700, we'll be assured that the kidneys are functioning properly. Now we also have response to vasopressin. So to confirm the lack of renal concentration ability and distinguish nephrogenic diabetic insipidus from central diabetes insipidus, a vasopressin test is performed. Now, how do we do it? We have this injection that is desamino 8-D-arginine vasopressin, is also known as DDAVP desmopressin, is administered nasally or by an intramuscular injection, and the change in the urine osmolarity are seen. So what we'll do is to see the action or how this vasopressin actually responds. So we have this artificially made vasopressin and we are injecting it in the person, and we see how the osmolarity is seen or it's changed. So we have this two tests, that is water deprivation test and artificially injecting the vasopressin. So if the condition is normal, the patient is not suffering from any renal disorder. So what we'll get is in the water deprivation, the osmolarity would be more than 800 to 900 milliosmoles. In case of vasopressin, the osmolarity would be the same, or there will be minimal or there will be slight decrease, or it remains the same. In cases of central diabetes insipidus, there we'll get an osmolarity less than 300 in cases of water deprivation, and in case of vasopressin injected in central diabetes insipidus, there would be a substantial increase in the osmolarity in response to vasopressin. If partial central diabetes insipidus is there, then the range changes 300 to 800. In case of artificial vasopressin, injected vasopressin, we get an increase of 10%. In cases of nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, less than 200 to 300, we will find the osmolarity. And here we get minimal or no increase. We also have primary polydipsia. There is primary polydipsia is due to reasons we have increased thirst. So if we are drinking more water, the osmolarity will reduce. So water deprivation test, we have osmolarity more than 500. And here in case of vasopressin response, we have minimal or no increase. So these data can actually be used to see what is the concentration capacity of renal tubules. In continuing this, we also have a test for urinary acidification. This method is actually used for a particular type of disease that we call renal tubular acidosis. So if we are suspecting a patient to be suffering from renal tubular acidosis, we can go for this test. That is urine pH. We need to measure the urine pH. The pH of a fresh specimen of urine is tested with pH meter. A concentrated fasting morning sample of urine is acidic. A pH of less than 5.5 virtually excludes distal renal tubular acidosis. So if we have, so what we do is we get a specimen of urine and we measure the pH. A concentrated fasting morning sample, that is overnight fasting has been done, and the morning sample of urine is acidic. Usually it is acidic, and if the pH is less than 5.5, so it will exclude distal renal tubular. So the exclude means it can rule out that the person is not suffering from this disease, renal tubular acidosis. We can also go for urine anion gap. That is a difference between concentration of principal urinary cations like sodium and potassium and anion chlorine. So we'll measure the concentration of sodium and potassium, also the concentration of chlorine, and we'll see what is the difference between their concentration. So the difference is expected to estimate the unmeasured anion and cation, which normally includes ammonium and carbonates. Since the latter, that is ammonium and carbonate, is mostly reabsorbed, urine anion gap is chiefly measure of ammonium excretion. So see, it's very interesting to understand the concept. I will explain you one more time. You had a calculation of sodium and potassium. Suppose you gave it a value x, and you had a measurement of an ion calculation, you gave it a value y. So now, in normal condition, you know what is the difference between them. But now, as the filtrate also contains ammonium and bicarbonates, so usually these later ones are reabsorbed. That is, the bicarbonates are reabsorbed. But as bicarbonate is a negative ion, so if it's getting excreted in the urine, so the amount of anion will increase. If the amount of anion will increase, the difference between these two, that is cation and anion, will decrease, and that will give you an estimation that there is some acidification or malabsorption present in the tubules. Like in presence of systemic metabolic acidosis, ammonium excretion is expected to be stimulated while the bicarbonate excretion is minimal. Hence, urine anion gap should be negative due to obligatory chloride excretion with ammonia. In patients with renal tubular acidosis, the gap remains to be positive due to impaired ammonium production. So this makes it quite clear that in normal circumstances, the gap should be in a negative. Negative means there will be more concentration of chlorine and less concentration of sodium and potassium. Whereas the opposite happens when a person is suffering from renal tubular acidosis. We also have one more test for measuring the acidity or the pH of the urine or acidosis condition. That is the sodium bicarbonate loading test. The bicarbonate threshold is the plasma bicarbonate level at which bicarbonate appears in urine. Usually it doesn't appear, it is completely reabsorbed. The bicarbonate threshold is determined by infusion of bicarbonate and increasing the plasma bicarbonate in a stepwise manner to elevate the serum bicarbonate level to 23 to 26 milliequivalent per liter of blood. So once you increase the load, so if you are getting bicarbonates in urine, so that gives you an estimation that there is renal tubular acidosis. So what is happening is 3 to 5 milliliter per kg of sodium bicarbonate is administered orally or intravenously which increases the urine pH to more than 7.4. So the level of bicarbonate and creatinine are measured in blood and random urine specimen. Normally there is no bicarbonate urea unless the plasma bicarbonate level exceeds 23 to 24 milliequivalent per liter. The urinary bicarbonate threshold is reduced to proximal renal tubular acidosis. So the fractional excretion of bicarbonate is calculated by the formula. How do we calculate? It is urine concentration of bicarbonate multiplied by plasma creatinine divided by plasma concentration of bicarbonate multiplied by urine creatinine, and that is multiplied by 100. Now the normal value of this is less than 5%. In proximal renal tubular acidosis, this value might increase to 15%. Other tests used are urine partial carbon dioxide pressure and ammonium chloride loading test might also be used. Now in this continuation, we have some other investigation like measurement of serum protein, that is serum albumin level, serum cholesterol level, as in cases of nephrotic syndrome, we find hypercholesterolemia, anti-streptococcal antibody titer. This antibody titer against hemolytic streptococcus is important for diagnosis of post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. There is a concentration of more than 200 international units per ml is positive. Also serum complement, and there is measurement of C3 and C4 level in blood is important for diagnosis of post-infectious glomerulonephritis, membranoproliferative glomerulonephritis, and lupus nephritis. Where decrease in C3 level are present, the level of C3 are increased in active rheumatoid arthritis. The normal range of serum C3 is 70 to 120 and that of C4 is 20 to 50 milligrams per deciliter of blood. Also, serum immunoglobulins are measured, like in cases of IgA nephropathy, where high level of IgA might be seen, and also, as if you remember, we have gone through Wegener's granulomatosis, and there this ANCA, that is anti-neutrophilic cytoplasmic antibodies. So I will give you a reference. Please refer to the lecture based on vasculitis, where you're finding the Wegener's granulomatosis. And in post-immune crescentic glomerulonephritis, these antibodies might be detected. We'll continue with the imaging techniques and the other possibilities of renal function test in the third part of the lecture.